"Your role is to stay quiet," Charles whispered, his hand gripping my knee as we sat in the luxury sedan outside the gleaming Westfield financial headquarters. His wedding ring pressed painfully into my skin. "Remember what we discussed, Elaine. I'm the one who built this company. You're just the supportive wife." I nodded silently, smoothing the creases of my tailored navy suit. The presentation materials were tucked neatly into my leather portfolio. Months of work, innovative financial strategies I'd developed in secret while Charles thought I was taking cooking classes and attending charity luncheons. 10 years ago, I would have believed I deserved nothing more than to be the silent partner, the quiet wife who stood 3 steps behind her successful husband. Back then, fresh out of business school, I'd been dazzled by Charles Westfield, 15 years my senior, already a partner at one of Boston's top investment firms with a corner office overlooking the harbor. "You have such potential," he'd told me on our 3rd date, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "But the business world can be brutal for women. Let me guide your career." That guidance had meant giving up my job offer from Goldman Sachs to work as his personal assistant. Then after our wedding, giving up work entirely to focus on our future family, a family that never materialized despite years of trying. "Remember," Charles continued as we pulled up to the valet station, "these investors flew in from Tokyo and Singapore. They expect traditional values. Just smile and nod." The irony wasn't lost on me. These traditional investors had specifically requested to meet the financial strategist behind Westfield's revolutionary new wealth management approach, me. But Charles had conveniently forgotten to mention that detail when accepting the meeting. Inside the conference room, 12 men in expensive suits stood as we entered. Mr. Tanaka, the lead investor, approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Westfield," he said, reaching for my hand first, "your analysis of emerging markets was brilliant. I'm eager to hear more about your implementation strategy." Charles stepped between us smoothly. "Mr. Tanaka, gentlemen, I'm delighted you appreciated our team's work. Shall we begin?" I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, away from the projector and presentation materials. Charles launched into his introduction, claiming credit for the very strategies I'd developed during late nights and early mornings, working while he slept. The Westfield approach, as I've developed it, uses a proprietary algorithm to identify undervalued assets in transitional economies. My work, my algorithm, my approach. I glanced around the room. The Singapore contingent was whispering among themselves, looking confused. Mr. Tanaka's smile had faded. "Excuse me, Mr. Westfield," interrupted Mr. Nakamura, the youngest investor. "We were under the impression that Mrs. Westfield would be presenting today. The analysis we reviewed bore her signature, did it not?" Charles's smile didn't waver. "My wife assists with documentation, of course. The strategies and analysis are mine." Mr. Tanaka's eyes narrowed. "I see. Perhaps there has been some miscommunication. The materials we received were quite specific about authorship." The tension in the room was palpable. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same sensation I'd experienced countless times throughout our marriage whenever Charles diminished my accomplishments. "Charles," I said quietly, "perhaps I should—" "Elaine handles some of the paperwork," Charles cut in smoothly. "A clerical error, I'm sure. Now, if we can proceed with the presentation." The door opened, and Marcus Jenkins, Westfield's operations manager, entered with an apologetic smile. "Sorry I'm late," he said, nodding to the investors before turning to me. "Mrs. Westfield, I brought the updated projections you requested." Charles's jaw tightened visibly. Marcus had been with the company for 20 years, longer than Charles himself. He'd been the one who first noticed my financial models and encouraged me to develop them further. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, accepting the folder. "Gentlemen," Marcus addressed the room, "before we continue, I want to make something clear. The Westfield approach you're here to discuss today, she taught us everything. Every strategy, every algorithm, every projection you've seen came directly from Elaine Westfield. The room fell silent. Charles's face reddened, his knuckles white against the polished table. "Marcus," he began, his voice dangerously low, "this isn't the appropriate—" "It's entirely appropriate," Marcus interrupted, his normally deferential tone replaced with firm conviction. "I've watched for 5 years as Elaine's work transformed this company while you took the credit. These gentlemen deserve to know whose expertise they're investing in." Mr. Tanaka looked from Marcus to me, then to Charles. "Mr. Westfield, is this true?" Charles gave a dismissive laugh. "My wife has contributed some ideas, certainly, but the core strategy, Marcus said, placing a flash drive on the table, is documented here. Every iteration, every development stage, every breakthrough, all in Mrs. Westfield's files, with timestamps and notes. I've maintained backups since the beginning, when it became clear what was happening. I felt as though I were watching the scene from outside my body. Years of silent accommodation, of diminishing myself to boost Charles's ego, of believing his constant assertions that my success depended entirely on him. It all crystallized in that moment. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, standing slowly. "Gentlemen, I believe I owe you an accurate presentation of the strategy you came to discuss." Charles grabbed my wrist under the table. "Sit down," he hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." I pulled free. "No, Charles. I'm finally standing up." As I moved to the head of the table, Charles's expression shifted from anger to something I'd rarely seen before: fear. For the first time in our marriage, he wasn't in control. "Gentlemen," I began, opening my portfolio. "The Westfield approach began 3 years ago when I identified a pattern in market volatility following political transitions in Southeast Asia. For 90 minutes I presented my work, every detail, every projection, every risk assessment. The investors were engaged, asking insightful questions that I answered with confidence born from years of research." Charles sat rigidly in his chair, silent but seething. When I concluded, Mr. Tanaka was the first to stand. "Mrs. Westfield, this is exactly what we came to hear. Your analysis is even more impressive when presented properly." One by one, the investors rose, applauding. Mr. Nakamura approached with his card. "My firm would be interested in discussing additional opportunities. Perhaps directly with you?" Marcus caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. He'd known what this moment would cost me, and what it would bring. As the investors filed out for the scheduled lunch, Charles remained seated, his face a mask of cold fury. "You've made quite a spectacle," he said once we were alone. "Do you feel better now? Undermining me in front of potential investors worth billions?" "I presented my work," I replied, gathering my materials. "Work you've been taking credit for since the beginning." "Your work?" Charles laughed bitterly. "Who gave you the opportunity? Who introduced you to the right people? Who provided the lifestyle that allowed you to sit around developing theories while other women actually had to work? I thought about the nights I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. analyzing data while he slept, the weekends I'd spent at the office while he played golf, the promotions I'd turned down at his insistence that working together would complicate our marriage. You didn't give me opportunities, Charles. You took them away." His laugh was hollow. "And now what? You think you can run this company without me? The board received copies of all my work this morning," Marcus said from the doorway, "along with documentation of how the Westfield approach increased our client retention by 68% and grew our managed assets by 112 million in 18 months. Charles stood so abruptly his chair crashed to the floor. "You had no right. This is my company." "It's a publicly traded company," Marcus corrected calmly, "and the board has fiduciary responsibilities to its shareholders." Charles turned to me, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone he'd used countless times to make me doubt myself. "Elaine, be reasonable. We built this life together. Everything we have, the house in Beacon Hill, the summer place in Nantucket, your mother's medical care, it all depends on us presenting a united front. My mother's care. Of course he would use that. After her stroke last year, I'd been grateful for the private facility Charles had insisted on. Another chain binding me to him, another debt I supposedly owed. My mother's care is covered by her own insurance, I said quietly. I checked last month, and the house in Beacon Hill is in my name, my father's wedding gift to us. As for Nantucket, you can keep it. I never liked it there anyway. Charles's face contorted. You've been planning this. Not planning, preparing. There's a difference. A plan implies intent. Preparation is just insurance. The conference room door opened again, and Mr. Tanaka appeared. Mrs. Westfield, the car is waiting to take us to lunch. Will you be joining us as discussed? I glanced at Charles, whose expression had shifted from anger to calculation. He was already thinking of how to spin this, how to maintain his position, how to explain to the board and our social circle why his wife had overstepped. Yes, Mr. Tanaka, I'll be right there. I turned back to Charles. I won't be coming home tonight, or any night after this. Don't be dramatic, Elaine. Where will you go? I thought of the apartment I'd leased 3 months ago, the bank accounts I'd opened in my own name, the divorce attorney whose card was tucked into my wallet. Forward, I said simply. I'm going forward. As I walked out of the conference room, I heard Charles call after me. This isn't over, Elaine. You'll regret this. Perhaps I would face regrets and challenges. But as I joined Mr. Tanaka and the other investors in the elevator, watching the doors close on my husband's furious face, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again let anyone tell me to stay quiet. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings and revelations. While Charles scrambled to maintain control, Marcus had arranged for me to present my full strategy to the board of directors. By the end of that meeting, I was officially appointed Chief Investment Strategist, a position created specifically for me. The board was impressed, Marcus told me as we left the executive suite, though some of them were clearly uncomfortable with the situation between you and Charles. I understood their discomfort. The Westfields were fixtures in Boston's financial community. Our marriage had been featured in the business journal's Power Couples spread just last year, an article that described me as the elegant hostess supporting one of finance's rising stars. They'll adjust, I said, more confidently than I felt. The numbers speak for themselves. That evening, I returned to my sparsely furnished apartment in Back Bay. It was smaller than the walk-in closet at our Beacon Hill home, but it was mine. No artwork chosen by Charles's decorator, no furniture that was too valuable to actually use. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Sarah. He's looking for you, called me twice asking where you're staying. I'd expected this. Charles hated losing control more than anything. Another text came through. Dinner tonight? I'm worried about you. Sarah had been my closest friend since college, though our relationship had become more distant after my marriage. Charles had never approved of her bohemian lifestyle as a freelance photographer, preferring that I socialize with the wives of his colleagues and clients. I'd love that, I replied. Somewhere quiet. We met at a small Italian restaurant in Cambridge, far from the financial district and the social circles Charles frequented. You look different, Sarah said as we settled into our booth. More like the Elaine I knew in college. Before Charles, you mean? She nodded, studying me over her wine glass. I've wanted to say something for years, you know, about how you changed after you married him, how you became smaller somehow. Why didn't you? I tried once. You defended him so fiercely that I backed off, and then we started seeing less of each other. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I didn't try harder. Don't be. I wouldn't have listened. Over pasta and wine, I told her everything. The years of subtle undermining, the way Charles had isolated me from my career and friends, how I'd started working in secret after realizing I'd lost myself entirely in being Mrs. Westfield. Have you spoken to him at all? Sarah asked. Only through lawyers. He's contesting the divorce, claiming I'm having a mental health crisis and that Marcus manipulated me to undermine him. Sarah's expression darkened. That's disgusting. It's predictable. Charles never accepts responsibility when things go wrong. I twirled pasta around my fork. He's also freezing the joint accounts, claiming I made unauthorized transfers when I set up my own finances. Can he do that? He can try. My attorney says it's a delaying tactic. I didn't mention the threatening voicemails, the late-night texts alternating between rage and pleading, or how I'd started varying my route to work after spotting his car near my apartment building twice. The following Monday, I arrived at the office to find a stack of financial magazines on my desk. Marcus entered with coffee and an apologetic expression. Have you seen these? The headlines told the story. Westfield marriage meltdown rocks Boston finance. Power couples public split. Who really built Westfield Financial? And worst of all, Charles Westfield claims wife's fragile mental state behind company chaos. He's going with the unstable wife narrative, I said, unsurprised. The board is concerned about the publicity, Marcus admitted. Some clients are asking questions. Then let's give them answers. I set down the magazines. Schedule a meeting with our top 20 clients. I'll walk them through the strategy personally. Charles won't like that. Charles doesn't make these decisions anymore. The meeting was set for Friday. I spent the week preparing, ignoring the growing media speculation and the increasingly concerned messages from my mother's nurses about Charles's frequent visits to her care facility. Friday morning, I dressed carefully in a crimson suit I'd bought myself. Nothing from the wardrobe Charles had curated for me. As I applied my lipstick, my phone rang with a call from the care facility. Mrs. Westfield? I'm sorry to bother you, but your husband is here again, and your mother seems quite agitated after his visit. He told her you're having some psychological issues. My hand tightened around the phone. Is my mother all right? She's asking for you. She's worried. Tell her I'm fine and I'll visit this afternoon. And please, don't allow my husband to see her again without my permission. He said he's still her son-in-law and has family rights. My mother's care directives name me as her only authorized decision-maker. If Mr. Westfield returns, please contact security, then call me immediately. I ended the call, hands shaking with anger. Using my vulnerable mother against me was low, even for Charles. When I arrived at the office, the reception area was already filled with our top clients. I recognized most of them. I'd met them at company events where Charles had introduced me as my lovely wife before steering conversations away from business. Today would be different. As I approached the conference room, I heard Charles's voice inside. My steps faltered. He wasn't supposed to be here. Marcus intercepted me in the hallway. He showed up with Edward Phillips, he said, referring to our largest domestic client. Said he was invited. I couldn't exactly throw him out. I took a deep breath. It's fine. This was bound to happen eventually. When I entered, Charles was at the head of the table, my designated position. He looked up with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, Elaine, glad you could join us. I was just explaining to everyone the unfortunate confusion of the past few weeks. 20 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. These were wealthy, powerful people who disliked messy personal situations interfering with their money. Good morning, everyone, I said, walking to the front of the room. Thank you for coming. I understand there have been concerns about the direction of Westfield Financial. Charles remained seated, his smile fixed. I've assured everyone that despite some internal restructuring, their investments are secure under my continued leadership. Mr. Phillips, a silver-haired venture capitalist who'd been with Westfield since its founding, cleared his throat. We've been hearing conflicting reports. The changes to my portfolio last quarter were apparently your wife's strategy, not yours, Charles. I'd like clarity on who's actually managing my money. Before Charles could respond, I placed my portfolio on the table. That's exactly why I called this meeting, Mr. Phillips. Complete transparency about who developed the strategies that have grown your investments by 32% in the last 18 months. Charles stood, buttoning his jacket smoothly. Elaine has contributed some interesting ideas, which I've incorporated into our broader strategy. However, the fundamental approach is entirely my work, I finished, and I can prove it. The room fell silent as I distributed folders containing detailed timelines of the strategy development, annotated with dates, version histories, and results. Each of you has seen significant growth since we implemented what's been called the Westfield approach, I continued. What you may not know is that these strategies were developed and executed without Mr. Westfield's input, or, frankly, his knowledge. Charles's face flushed dark red. This is absurd. Elaine has been experiencing significant personal difficulties. What my husband means, I cut in, maintaining a calm tone, is that I've finally stood up for myself after years of having my work appropriated. The personal difficulties he refers to are my decision to file for divorce after discovering the extent to which he's misrepresented my contributions. Several clients exchanged glances. Mrs. Harrington, who ran a tech investment fund and had always been cool toward me at social events, studied the documents with narrowed eyes. "These projections," she said, looking up, "they match exactly what happened in the Singapore markets last quarter. Who foresaw that shift?" Before I could answer, Marcus stepped forward and placed a laptop on the table. "We have the development records here. Every analysis, every projection, every recommendation, all with metadata showing when they were created and by whom." Charles's attorney, whom I hadn't noticed until now, stood from the corner of the room. "This presentation is inappropriate and potentially violates confidentiality agreements Mrs. Westfield signed upon her marriage." "I signed no such agreements," I replied. "And as chief investment strategist of this firm, I have both the right and obligation to be transparent with our clients." "A position created under dubious circumstances," the attorney countered. "Mr. Westfield has filed complaints with the board regarding conflicts of interest and corporate espionage." A murmur ran through the room. This was what Charles had been planning, painting me as not just unstable but potentially criminal. Mrs. Harrington raised a manicured hand. "I'm not interested in your marital drama. I'm interested in results. Who will be managing my fund going forward?" Charles stepped toward her with his most charming smile. "Patricia, as I've always—" "I wasn't asking you, Charles," she interrupted coldly. "I'm asking your wife." The room grew quieter still. Charles's smile faltered as Mrs. Harrington turned to me expectantly. "I will personally oversee all strategic decisions for your portfolio," I assured her. "The day-to-day operations team remains unchanged." "Good," she nodded, "because my returns have doubled since you, not your husband, began influencing my investments. I recognized the strategic shift 18 months ago and had my team investigate who was actually making the decisions." She glanced at Charles. "It wasn't difficult to determine." One by one, other clients spoke up, asking pointed questions about their portfolios, questions that Charles struggled to answer while I provided specific details without hesitation. The mood in the room shifted perceptibly. Mr. Phillips finally stood, straightening his tie. "I think I've heard enough. Charles, we've known each other for 20 years, but it seems I've been working with the wrong Westfield." He turned to me. "Mrs. Westfield, I'd like to schedule a private consultation regarding my portfolio's future direction." "Of course, Mr. Phillips. My assistant will arrange it." As other clients began gathering their materials, many making similar requests for meetings with me, Charles's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Charles nodded sharply, then addressed the room. "I understand everyone's confusion given the theatrical nature of today's presentation. However, there are serious legal and ethical questions about how certain information was obtained. Until these matters are resolved, I must advise caution about making any changes to your investment strategies." It was a desperate move. I could see from the client's expressions that it had backfired, making Charles appear obstructionist rather than prudent. As the room emptied, Charles remained, his attorney hovering nearby. When the last client had gone, he approached me, voice low. "You've made your point, Elaine. Now let's discuss how to resolve this without further damage to the company or your reputation." "There's nothing to discuss. The truth is out." "The truth?" He laughed harshly. "You think these people care about truth? They care about money. And when they realize that your little rebellion is threatening their returns, they'll demand stability. That means me." "You're wrong. They've already seen that their best returns came from my strategies, not yours." His expression hardened. "You really believe you've won, don't you? That you can just walk away with half of everything I've built and take over my company? I don't want half of what you've built, Charles. I want full credit for what I've built." Marcus approached, pointedly standing beside me. "The board is waiting for your call, Elaine. They've been monitoring the client responses." Charles's face went still in the way I recognized from our worst arguments, when he realized he couldn't charm or intimidate his way to victory. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've had your moment in the spotlight, but we both know you don't have what it takes to maintain it. The first market downturn, the first strategy that fails, they'll turn on you. And I'll be waiting." For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the powerful man who had swept me off my feet, not as the controlling husband who had diminished me for years, but as someone desperately afraid of being exposed as less than he pretended to be. "Goodbye, Charles," I said simply, turning away. 3 months later, I sat in my new office, not Charles's old one, but a brighter space I'd chosen on the eastern side of the building. The divorce was proceeding, messy but inexorable. Charles had been removed as CEO following a board vote, though he remained a significant shareholder, a fact he reminded me of through his attorneys regularly. The Japanese and Singaporean investors had committed to a major expansion of our partnership. Mrs. Harrington had transferred her entire portfolio to my direct management. My mother had been moved to a care facility nearer to my new apartment, away from Charles's influence. There were still difficult days. The financial press continued to speculate about the Westfield saga. Former friends from our social circle had chosen sides, most staying with Charles and his narrative of the unstable, ungrateful wife. The board watched my every move, ready to pounce on any misstep. But for the first time in a decade, I was standing fully in my own power, speaking with my own voice. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Marcus entered with Mr. Tanaka, who had flown in for our quarterly review. "Mrs. Westfield," Mr. Tanaka greeted me with a respectful bow. "I've just come from a most interesting lunch." "Oh?" "Yes, your former husband invited me to discuss mutual opportunities. He seemed to think I might be reconsidering our arrangement with Westfield Financial given the changes in leadership." I tensed. Charles still had powerful connections and considerable wealth. If he convinced our international partners to withdraw. "And what did you tell him?" I asked carefully. Mr. Tanaka smiled. "I told him that I invest in vision and integrity, not just strategies, that I had found both in his former wife and saw no reason to change course." Relief washed through me. "Thank you for your confidence. It is well earned." He placed a proposal on my desk. "Now, shall we discuss the expansion into emerging Southeast Asian markets you suggested?" As we settled into the meeting, I glanced at the framed quote I'd hung on my wall, words I'd once read in a book during those secret hours when I was rediscovering myself. "Your silence will not protect you." I had stayed silent for years, believing it would keep the peace, preserve my marriage, protect the life I thought I wanted. I had been wrong. It was only when I finally spoke, when I refused to stay quiet any longer, that I found my true voice and the strength to use it. The woman who had obediently whispered, "Yes, Charles," for a decade was gone. In her place stood someone who would never again allow anyone to tell her that her role was to stay quiet.